I'm Conor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hey, welcome to Heavy Hands. Why did I introduce the show that way, Pat? No time, we're moving on. Welcome back. Last week we previewed Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez and a couple other fights from UFC 205. The card lived up to expectations. It was fantastic. It was fun. It was one of the first times in a long time that I got to sit down, order a pay-per-view, eat some wings, and watch an entire fight card from the comfort of my couch from start to finish. So hooray for that. It was absolutely fantastic. But first, Pat, a little bit of crowing. The drought is over. For once, we have picked a Conor McGregor fight correctly. I believe the last time you and I collectively did that, you may have differed from me with a pick sometime in the middle there, but I believe the last time either of us picked a fight correctly was the Dennis Siver fight.
That is correct. Yeah, I picked Mendez. We both picked Aldo. Did you pick Mendez too?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we both picked Mendez. We both picked Aldo. We both picked McGregor over Diaz the first time, and then I think we both picked
yes.
Diaz over McGregor the second. That is a tremendous run of terrible picking, man. That is real bad.
It really is. It really is. I always say my legitimate cop-out is that I care less about getting the picks right than I do about understanding the matchup fully, which is actually true. Picking is, I think, a very specialized skill. You know, for example, I don't think Steph from Bloody Elbow, Crooklyn, would go toe-to-toe with me as far as writing an MMA analysis article. She has Ian Kidd on her show to do that. But she outpicks me by a ridiculous margin. She seems almost to just pick the people that she knows, and she always has a good record. So it's an art more than it is a craft for sure. But the good thing about this one, Pat, is that we both understood the matchup and got the pick right, and that feels good.
For once. But yeah, I mean, regardless of the fact that we got the outcome right, I think that I'm very proud of the fact that we correctly identified the dynamics, and I think we also correctly identified the approach that both fighters would take. And I think that when you put those two things together, the outcome that we picked made perfect sense, and that's exactly how the fight played out. Because we both talked about Alvarez having a couple of different options here, right? In terms of his pressure or sticking and moving on the outside and letting McGregor come to him. Well, he tried both of those, and both times he ran into the single big problem, which was McGregor's power, his craft, and the timing on his counters.
Yeah.
In both cases, when he tried to stick and move, he ran into a left-hand counter. When he tried to pressure, he ran into a left-hand counter. And I mean, I didn't expect it to be quite that dominant, but that's exactly the dynamic that played out. He just couldn't handle McGregor's craft or his timing on his counters or the power in those shots.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just I'm not going to use this as a reason to continue being smug about having picked it correctly, because there are many people who did that, and many people who have been picking McGregor's fights correctly for some time. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. But as a good guide to understand what McGregor did, I did my gaps in the armor piece prior to this fight about how Conor McGregor beats Eddie Alvarez. I game planned for him. He did three things that I laid out to a T. And it's not like makes me some kind of mystic Conor, mystic Ree. I can't really match Mystic Mac for catchiness. But these are just the kind of, I think, the obvious things that McGregor would have wanted to do against Alvarez, given his specific limitations and strengths. I had 3, pressure with positioning, not volume. In other words, don't lead constantly and let your hands go all the time. 2, uppercuts and straight shots to the body. Not much of that, actually, but we did see some straight kicks to the body. And then 1, make Alvarez lead and counter his counters. That was the most important thing. And that was basically it. He cornered Alvarez as much as he could. he led as rarely as possible, and he made Alvarez do what he has always been worst at, which is, lunge in with right hands. And he clipped him every single time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was just on point from the opening bell. The triggers on his counters were so sharp from the very beginning of the fight. And I think that this was the culmination of Conor McGregor's evolution. Like, McGregor, whatever you think about him outside of the cage, inside the cage, his UFC career has been a long process of evolution. I think even more so than a lot of fighters that we see. Like, because it's evolution within a skill set. Like, McGregor has not turned into a wrestler at some point. Like, there are plenty of guys who start their careers as strikers or wrestlers and shift more toward relying on one skill set over another as their careers go on. Like, GSP comes to mind in that regard. Like, he could always wrestle, but towards the end of his career, he basically became a top control wrestler. McGregor has evolved as a striker. Like, like, at the end of the day, his goal has always been to put the left hand on you, but the way he has gone about doing that has shifted drastically. Like, he was basically a one-handed come forward puncher with a couple of tricks up his sleeve, like crafty tricks, effective tricks, but a limited number of them early in his career. Then he became kind of a swarming wild man with a kind of a diverse kicking arsenal. And then, he became like a measured pressure fighter with a kicking arsenal, and then he became a swarming wild man. And slowly but surely, he has evolved into a measured counterpuncher, like an aggressive counterpuncher, but a measured one.
Yeah.
And like, that is a much more viable approach for him in the long term than anything he's shown before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that McGregor, and he's obviously been studying some boxers who specialize in this same kind of thing, because we even got to see the Roy Jones Jr.-esque hands behind the back during the Alvarez fight. But the more confident I think that McGregor comes in his head movement and his defense overall, I think the more we will continue to see that countering game blossom. And I think it's for two reasons. Firstly, he's good at it. He's got really fast hands, long reach. He can make most of his opponents give up their advantages by rushing across that open space and not himself covering that distance for them. One of the best things to do against a long fighter is always to, let them come forward and then like slip under their shot and collapse the pocket. And so McGregor does not give a lot of people that option because they have to come forward first and they have this huge gulf to traverse. But the other thing is that McGregor, I think, enjoys kind of humiliating his opponents and putting on a show. And what better way to do that than to just confidently hang out in front of the guy with your hands down and just pull counter his face off all day. You have to know McGregor admires the boxing skill of Floyd Mayweather. You know what I mean? That he's watched that guy just make fun of his opponents while beating them up and thought, I don't want to even have to just do talking. I want to go into the ring or the cage, and I want to let my fighting be its own form of mockery. And it kind of is, except it's very, very dangerous mockery.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is something that we've talked about to some extent with a bunch of different fighters over the years, but different fighters have different ways of feeling like they're in control of the action. And for some guys, that's much more important than it is for others. I think it's important for McGregor, like, I think so too, in his head, to feel like he's in control of what's happening. Look
at how dramatic. Ooh, my gosh, just banged the shit out of my desk. Look how dramatic the body language shift has been in both of the Diaz fights. It is not, I have never seen someone realize they're tired and change body language that dramatically. It is honestly, and I'm not making a direct comparison for style or anything, but McGregor, even in the second fight, realizing he's tired and suddenly starting to turn his back and run, is so reminiscent of Alistair Overeem doing that against Stipe Miocic. It is really, really a striking resemblance. When he feels like he's not easily winning the fight, I think things really change for him. So it's really important for him to feel in some way like he is making his opponent do what he wants them to do, rather than the other way around. He cannot be reactive, and I think it's a smart adjustment for him over the course of his career that he has turned himself into a counterpuncher who is still not reactive, because they are reacting to what he's showing them, and then he counters them.
Yeah, exactly. And the Overeem comparison is interesting because you can see in both cases how important confidence is to both guys. Like, both guys the entire basis for their game is this idea of confidence. But Overeem's crumbles easily. You know, it's not a resilient kind of confidence, and that's not the case for McGregor. Like,
well, McGregor's may not have been either. It looked pretty bad in the first fight. I think he learned the lesson though.
Well, yeah, but so that's kind of the difference,
yeah.
right? Like it's not all three of McGregor's career losses have come because he panicked.
Sure.
Like that is the root thing that ties together every loss and even every bad moment, every bad minute, every bad round of McGregor's career has come when he panicked. That was the case in the Diaz fight. He kind of panicked when he felt himself start to get tired. Mm-hmm. He definitely panicked in the first fight when he got tired, shot a shitty takedown, or got buzzed.
Oh, yeah.
Shot a shitty takedown and got his back taken. That's what happened when he got taken down and arm triangled by Joe Duffy. The fight lasted like 38 seconds. You know, the second that he felt like he wasn't in control of that fight, Duffy submitted him. I'm like, it's been a while since I've watched the Artemis Sitnikov fight, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened there too. Is he got his leg wrapped up, panicked, and ended up kind of panic tapping.
Yeah,
like,
but the brilliant thing is how he can face literally the exact same circumstances a second time around, maybe with a slightly depleted Diaz, but he could take that situation from one fight to the next, back to back, and basically resolve the issue. That he could still panic, of course. It looked like he still lost his cool, but that he basically learned over the course of, what was the difference there? 5 months? How to fight tired, how to fight when your confidence is crumbling, and how to fight in such a way that it comes back eventually.
Yeah, exactly. And so you mentioned something earlier. We got a little off track with the talking about the confidence, but I wanted to talk about McGregor fighting long, because I think he's getting better at that, and because you mentioned the gap that he likes to set, his ability to set a distance, which is not functionally different than what someone like Stephen Thompson wants to do. Like, it's basically the same strategy. You set a long distance, and that allows you to either lead with blitzing combinations, like you get to pick and choose the spots where you want to come in, or alternatively, you force them to cover that distance. And because the distance is so long, it gives you all the time in the world to pick and choose your angles very carefully on your counters.
And both guys enhance that by doing a lot of leaning forward in their stance. So they have a large depth of room behind their heads to pull back into and make that space even larger than it appears.
Yeah, but the difference between the two guys is how much more power McGregor has.
Oh yeah,
and I think kind of the depth of his counterpunching arsenal. Like, he is getting, he went from having basically one counter that he liked, which was kind of a step back inside angle left hand counter, to throwing same time counters, to working on very straight pull counters, not angled pull counters. Like, the sheer depth of that game is getting to the point where he's one of the best counter punchers in the sport.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he ain't never going to catch up to Wonderboy's kicking game, but Stephen Thompson has a long way to go before he can call himself a counter puncher of McGregor's caliber. I can't really think of somebody who has that nuanced and that deep of a counter punching arsenal in the UFC. Yeah. No one comes to the mind immediately, at the very least.
I think we could probably come up with a couple of parallels if we tried really hard, if we thought about it a lot.
But it matters that it does seem like, he's at the top of the mountain there.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that nobody comes to mind is like, oh yeah, that guy's obviously a better counterpuncher. Like, I think that tells us a lot. But so the distance management thing. So McGregor did a lot of that with kicks. When he came into the UFC in his first couple of UFC fights, he added the oblique kicks, the side kicks. He added the front kicks a lot against Chad Mendes. We saw them a lot there. He kind of fell in love with the spinning kicks. And I think he lost sight of what they were supposed to be doing. Like in the first Diaz fight, I think he lost sight of what purpose in the broader context of his game the kick served. I don't think he has forgotten that anymore. I think we saw a lot of front kicks against Eddie Alvarez, but more importantly, we saw a jab. Why is a jab better than front kicks for managing distance in the context of a game where you're worried about your gas tank and your energy? Jab doesn't take much energy as compared to a front kick or a round kick or a side kick or what have you. It's a much more efficient tool for managing distance. I
wonder if maybe we misinterpreted the point of the spinning kicks and maybe lent too much brilliance to them. Like, we're like, why is this guy throwing so many wheel kicks? It's to force his opponent back. That's always what ended up happening. But maybe it was really just because, and I actually think we suggested this on the show once before, maybe it was just because McGregor thought they looked cool. Because we know he does stuff because it looks cool. He absolutely does. Look at the way he dresses. Look at the way he talks. Look at the stance that he has chosen to fight out of. You know that's a little bit because it looks kind of like a Bruce Lee stance, and not entirely because it's the objectively best stance for MMA.
Yeah.
There's some of that there to McGregor.
I think he's too smart not to know what the effect of those. Even if
it's not about intelligence, right? It's not about intelligence. When you're dominating everybody, like, you can really have your judgment clouded. I really think for a while there, if his goal was to sort of control the distance and corral his opponents with those spinning kicks, if that was his overall goal, I think he was losing sight for some time there of what they do. I mean, going back to the Diego Brandao fight where he was constantly trying to counter Brandao with wheel kicks while he was punching. Did the same in the Seaver fight a lot. And then against Chad Mendes, they were really effective, actually, the back kicks. But going up to the Nate Diaz fight, he was throwing them like crazy and really going for Nate Diaz's head. And it really made no sense as a tactic. I mean, he already had Diaz against the fence, and then he was throwing wheel kicks. So...
That's true. Well, but I think that tells us the fact that he didn't do that in the last two fights. I think that tells us a very, very great deal about who McGregor is as a fighter, and that's that he would rather fucking win fights than look cool.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, everything else being equal, which is not true of every fighter. There are plenty of fighters who would rather run the risk of losing fights if it means they get to do something that looks cool and has a high chance of causing like a crazy ass knockout.
Yeah, every fighter, I think, with very few exceptions, is susceptible to getting caught up in their own narrative in some way. The huge confidence boost that comes from a winning streak is really only rivaled by the crushing deflation that comes with a loss after a winning streak. I think the ego of a fighter is generally a pretty fragile thing, and that's not to say they're different from normal people. It's just that normal people don't put themselves on that stage and try to prove themselves in that way. But the really important thing for McGregor is that he is able to take the right things away from his losses at the very least. He may not look at some of his wins and be like, okay, these things need to change. But when he lost to Nate Diaz, a lot of little adjustments were made that needed to be made. You know, he did not come into the second fight doing the same thing, and that is one of the very best things you can say about him. He cares about winning, about getting better, and he is still very clearly making adjustments and improving. Unfortunately, with this fight, we didn't get to learn whether the cardio issues were a fluke against Nate Diaz or not. I would have liked to have seen that. It did look like he was more comfortable because Alvarez was not throwing as much. Per your theory, Pat, Alvarez wasn't giving him enough opportunities and taking enough counter punches that McGregor's volume started to kind of be a detriment to himself. But he did look okay. So maybe it is just that Diaz's combination of durability and volume is a nightmare matchup for McGregor in terms of stamina because he throws every single time he gets an opening.
Yeah, I mean, I really tend to think that that's the case. But in general, I like this kind of normally, you know, I'm in love with volume. I love guys who work at a quick pace. But what was striking about this fight was the fact that McGregor only threw about 10 strikes a minute. Yeah. Despite almost the entirety of the fight taking place at range, at striking distance, he was accurate with the shots that he threw. He landed like 40% of his shots, and in a long distance striking matchup, that's a pretty high percentage, especially when so many of those are headshots, which is the hardest target to hit. But you know, normally I want a guy who's going to try and go out there and throw 15 or 18 strikes a minute because I think that's the clearest way to win fights. But when you're Conor McGregor and you have the power that he has, you can win rounds only throwing 10 strikes a minute. That's not true for everyone.
Especially when you're making the other guy's terrified of getting hit by you, so he's not throwing a lot, and you're making him lead and picking him apart when he doesn't. So it was a very smart approach.
In 8 minutes, Eddie Alvarez threw 40 strikes. Like, that speaks to A, the distance that McGregor was able to set, and B, his ability to use his power to disincentivize his power and his counters to disincentivize Alvarez from doing things. Like, that is a crazy, like, a Mark Henry fighter throwing 5 strikes a minute is like, that's insane. That never happens. Like, he has his guys on a clock and a strike counter in sparring sessions to make sure that they throw enough strikes to win rounds. Yeah. So, and Mark Henry is a guy who trains his game plan into his fighters. Like, Eddie probably wasn't planning on coming out here and doing a Frankie Edgar thing and throwing 20 strikes a minute, but the plan was not to throw 5. I guarantee you that much.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to wonder. I would be really interested to hear what the game plan was, because honestly, the fight looked predictable. It looked like the fight we called at the very least, and so I have to wonder. Typically, when that happens, it means that someone has a failure of game plan, that they're not overcoming what you and I see as an innate disadvantage to win.
Yeah, fairly obvious things. Like, it's not like we were the only people to pick out these things and say, like, these are the dynamics of the fight. Like, Mark Henry has spent a lot more time in the gym and watching tape and training fighters than we have. Like, Mark Henry is nobody's fool. That was, I guarantee you, like, Alvarez getting caught on the end of McGregor's reach and getting picked apart and countered to death was not the game plan.
No, absolutely not. So I do have to wonder. Maybe we could at some point talk to Mark about that and glean his thoughts. But let's take a break before we get to any of that. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the people we would like to see fight Conor McGregor next. I think that's a very interesting discussion to be had right now, especially as he takes a little time off to experience. I won't say enjoy the experience because he seemed pretty nervous about it, but live the experience of being a father. And when we come back, we'll talk about one of the other fighters who appeared in this card, Khabib Nurmagomedov, among others, the many lightweight, featherweight, and even welterweight people who McGregor may in fact be meeting when he returns to the octagon in May. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. You know, Pat, we are actually recording this episode the day after we originally intended to, because when it came to it, time to record, much like Conor McGregor's girlfriend, Dee Devlin, I was late. And so now we have a long delay. We have a long delay as a result until Conor McGregor fights again. In the meantime, we have all of this shuffling that will go on. Some fights may happen between some of these guys. Some may not. Some may sit out and decide to wait. Most of them will probably make some noise, except Tony Ferguson for some reason, who seems completely content to remain quiet for reasons I don't understand. But basically, we get a long time now to figure out who is going to fight Conor McGregor next. Will it be a defense of the featherweight title? Will it be a fun matchup, a fun and relatively meaningless matchup? Although I guess against Nate Diaz it would be for the lightweight title. Or will it be against a serious lightweight contender? Will it even possibly be against Tyron Woodley? Because those guys are talking about that, and that is just a bananas. The notion is insane. So let's go ahead and run through what our favorite options for McGregor are, which ones we would most like to see when he does make his return next year.
Well, so I think first and foremost, let's talk about Tony Ferguson, because it's kind of gotten forgotten given everything that happened at UFC 205, but it was literally like a week and a half ago that Tony Ferguson took a clean decision from Rafael dos Anjos, pretty uncontroversial 5-round decision. And we were questioning whether Tony Ferguson could be the guy to defeat Conor McGregor. Like we thought, and I think we may have said this on air, or at least I did, that I thought that Tony Ferguson was a bad matchup for Conor McGregor, based on what we'd seen. I reserved the right to change my mind based on what McGregor looked like against Eddie Alvarez, but I thought on paper he was a kind of a bad matchup. But I mean, it would be a hellaciously entertaining fight. What do you think about that one?
I think it would be amazing. I would love to see that fight. And really, to me, the two lightweight fights are probably action-wise the ones I would be most interested to see. Unlike some of the other options, I think Ferguson is the one who would largely consent to fight the kind of fight that McGregor wants, at least in terms of phase. I think he would probably do a lot of striking with Conor McGregor. But he has the grappling arsenal in his back pocket, and then he does have a lot of what Nate Diaz had. His style is different. He tends to come forward more, but he throws a lot of volume. I think he's probably tough enough to take a good number of McGregor's punches, more than most guys. And really a good number with McGregor often just means like 10 instead of 50, 10 instead of 3, which is what most people take before going down. I think Ferguson's durable enough, and he has the stamina to capitalize when those two things combined start causing Conor McGregor to tire, which I have to assume will still happen against someone who just keeps eating counter after counter after counter without going away. I think he's also not that bad defensively when he wants to be. It does look like, retrospectively, that Tony Ferguson looked bad against Lando Venata because he completely overlooked the man he was fighting. I think he assumed he would come in there and literally just have fun, like it was a training session against a complete newbie, and it wasn't. Because when he fought Rafael dos Anjos, he didn't look half as hittable as he did against Venata, and Dos Anjos was actually doing a really good job of keeping his jab on him and mixing up his strikes, especially early. And Ferguson was doing a much better job of slipping and countering and using his awkwardness to his advantage. So we have the size, the height, and the reach. We have the strength of being a full-size lightweight. We have the stamina. We have the durability. We have the volume. I think that does kind of make it a bad matchup for McGregor, but I also think that we can't look at things that are bad matchups for McGregor in the same way we look at bad matchups for other fighters. I think that's been proven. We both kind of thought Chad Mendes was a bad matchup for him. It kind of looked like it, but Chad Mendes could not keep it up. We thought Nate Diaz was a bad matchup for him. I think it's always going to look like it, but Conor McGregor found the smartest way to overcome that problem. We can't just assume that because these are the things that McGregor is weak against, and these are the things Tony Ferguson does well, that means anybody is just going to go in there and execute a perfect game plan. Conor McGregor is a special fighter, and it bears keeping that in mind.
Yeah, so I agree with most of what you laid out. I think that Ferguson's pace is a huge issue for McGregor because, again, we've seen that he can be sucked into fighting at the pace his opponent wants to set, and it's not hard to take him out of his rhythm there. And, if we thought that Nate Diaz fought at a quick pace, Tony Ferguson over a 5-round fight can blow that pace out of the water. Yeah. Tony Ferguson threw 401 strikes in 25 minutes against Rafael dos Anjos at altitude. In Mexico
City. It's not even just altitude, it's smoggy altitude.
Yeah. He threw 401 strikes.
Yeah, that is insane.
That's nuts.
And he landed 199. He landed at a 50% clip.
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost, that's the thing the biggest thing you have to bear in mind in a potential matchup. He is hittable enough that I think McGregor could find ways to put his left hand on him. Mm-hmm. But as we've seen in the past, unless McGregor's power is truly out of this world, and there's a chance that it is, I'm willing to accept that possibility. He did knock Nate Diaz down 3 times in their second mm-hmm. fight. That's for real. That's serious power. He's probably not going to put Ferguson out. And in a fight that keeps going and going and going, that kind of grinding, wear you down kind of fight, hard not to favor Tony Ferguson in those in that kind of thing.
I mean, it took a lot of trying for Lando Venata to start putting Tony Ferguson on Queer Street. It took a clean head kick before he was really wobbling.
Yeah, I mean, that's insane. That doesn't mean his chin's going to last forever. It doesn't mean that again, that McGregor, this is something I want to talk about, but in a little while, is why McGregor seems to hit so hard. Because I think there are a couple of reasons that we can point to there. Okay. Why his power looks so much different than everybody else's does. But the big thing to me in that fight is not just the pace. It's not just the striking acumen of Tony Ferguson. It's his ability to find submissions in transition, and that has been a problem for McGregor in the past. We talked about him panicking. So what happens? We get into the third round of that fight. Ferguson has taken his best shot. They get into kind of a weird little clinch thing. Ferguson snaps him down, grabs a front headlock. A tired McGregor panic taps. That's a viable outcome to that kind of fight. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I mean, if Tony Ferguson wins, there is legitimate. If that fight happens, there's legitimate reason to place money on a prop bet that Ferguson gets a Darce choke. That is a reasonable bet to make because he's so good at it. That's actually
probably one of there are 3 likely outcomes to that fight: McGregor by knockout, Ferguson by decision, and Ferguson by submission. And I think that Ferguson by submission might be your best pick there.
And not even just Ferguson by submission. I'm saying Ferguson by Darce. He's so good at that one thing and goes for it so well there is a significant chance, more than any other fight I can think of, that one submission happens. It's almost like Ronda Rousey by armbar territory.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I don't know how I would pick. I would need to sit down and watch a lot of tape to see how, like, I would need to see tactics, not just strategy. To try and figure that out. But so real quick before we start talking about other competitors, McGregor's power, because it's not like he doesn't like separate guys from consciousness quite the same way somebody like Tyron Woodley does. Like, guys don't just go the fuck to sleep when McGregor hits them. You know, it's a little bit different than that. And I think that we talked about the snap that he gets and the way that he tends to catch guys at exactly the right point in the extension of the punch. We've talked about that before, but really, I think it's because of the angles and where he hits guys. Like, he really tends to hit guys on the temple and the ear. Like, they're the shots that take your equilibrium away. In a way that, like, with Woodley, it's just like the pure force of the shot catches you on the chin and you're done.
Woodley hurt Thompson with a shot to the eyebrow, I think.
Yeah.
Or like Chad Mendes hitting Ricardo Lamas on the top of the head and knocking him out. Yeah. McGregor's placement is very, very precise.
Yeah, it's the placement and the accuracy, and like there's raw power there for sure, but it's also just kind of the way that he finds angles to hit you from.
Yeah,
like,
I think you're right. I think a lot of what makes McGregor effective is that he's often hitting you from an angle where you physically cannot help yourself from being knocked down. You know, a lot of the guys he knocks down aren't insanely hurt by the power, but we only have two legs. We're a bipod. Rather than a tripod, which means we're not a very stable type of build as people from any way but like one angle. And that is why positioning is so important in fighting. You always want to present the angle from which you are hardest to knock off balance, because balance means durability. If you're off balance, you're easier to hurt. And what McGregor does is constantly punch people across the weak plane. You know, he's not going to be looking at their lead hip. He's going to be looking at their belly button when he hits them. You know, he's going to be looking across that parallel line of their feet, and there is no way to stop yourself from being more hurt by that punch than you would be by a punch from a different angle.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, there's a chance that in that kind of scenario, especially if Ferguson is in the orthodox stance, that all of the durability in the world isn't going to help you.
He also likes to square up sometimes.
Yeah, so there's a chance that McGregor's power when he hits somebody like Tony Ferguson might be qualitatively different than somebody like Rafael dos Anjos, who also hits really hard, but Ferguson ate his shots without any real issue.
Dos Anjos stands right in front of somebody and hits him, and McGregor does not do that. The angles are a big part of it. I think you're right.
Yeah. So, so that's one matchup. I don't know who I would pick. Like, again, I would need to dig into that one. That's a tough fight to call.
Which, it's an amazing fight. And that's the thing. Conor McGregor is clearly a next level fighter, but none of these fights against really deserving contenders seem like automatic picks for him. And a lot of people will call that Conor McGregor hate. A lot of people are fools. But the thing is that his fights are always fun. You know, whether he's completely dominating someone like Eddie Alvarez, and that's been the most confident I've been in picking McGregor in some time, or he's fighting like Nate Diaz, there's always something to just kind of let your mouth fall open and look at.
His fights aren't compelling because he's dominant on paper. You know, like when GSP fought Dan Hardy, there was no real question about the outcome to that fight. I remember them trying to sell that. I remember the way they tried to sell that fight. It was, you know, he's a really good striker. He's got big power, blah, 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 blah. Like, there was no fucking way GSP was going to lose that fight. Like, it was it was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. McGregor's fights are more like GSP beating Thiago Alves at his peak.
Yeah.
Like, this guy's dangerous in the one phase where GSP is possibly most vulnerable. He can stop the takedowns. He's got a jiu-jitsu game if he needs it. Like, all these things. And then you just watch the guy who's supposed to be fighting his toughest test in a while systematically pick that tough challenger apart. That's a McGregor fight.
Or like Anderson Silva, Vitor Belfort, you know, where it was like there were defined paths to victory. Like, that was not a foreordained outcome for a variety of reasons, as opposed to Anderson Silva versus Yushin Okami.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That is the McGregor situation. On that note, the other guy at lightweight that I would really like to see fight McGregor next, I think this is no surprise to anyone, Khabib Nurmagomedov. We can also use this as an opportunity to briefly talk about what Nurmagomedov did at UFC 205. And I'll just start off by saying that Michael Johnson hurt Khabib a little bit. I don't recall what Joe was saying during the fight, but some people are saying he was basically making it out like Khabib was completely out on his feet or was really hurt. I don't recall if that was the case. That obviously wasn't true. But he did run into the problem that you and I foresaw. He was outstruck. He couldn't get past the punches for a little while. But as is the book on Khabib Nurmagomedov, when he starts getting takedowns, he just keeps getting them. The fight only gets worse for you after he finds that first takedown. And that was once again the case against a guy with good outfighting, good counterpunching, and good takedown defense. But the big thing I took away from that fight is that Khabib, he has the top control of, I don't know, like a Jake Shields or like a Brock Lesnar. He even did some similar things with pinning an arm. He is a top control specialist, and usually the trade-off is that you control people and you keep them down, or you strike them and you let them scramble. And somehow Khabib does both. He is a top control artist with devastating ground and pound. And
yeah, I think actually Lesnar is probably the best analog to what he can do.
But look at the difference. Like, how can that be? Look at Lesnar's build compared to his opponents. You know, look at the kinds of people even that he was beating up. And then look at Khabib going in there against strong lightweights and not being that big, you know, as a lightweight, and just completely controlling people like that. I think he is obviously very athletic, very strong, but it really speaks to his level of technique and how smart and systematic he is on the ground, that he is able to do that to opponents who are usually about the same size as him.
Yeah, I mean, he's the whole package. We have never seen, I'm comfortable saying this at this point, we have never seen a kind of wrestle grappler of that caliber in this history of this sport. It has never existed. Like, he has the kind of ability to do damage from the top that somebody like Brock Lesnar did, with the same kind of control that somebody like Jake Shields brought, or even kind of Damian Maia. I think you could go that route in terms of how difficult it is to get him out, to get out from under him, and the way that he's always 2 or 3 steps ahead of you in terms of your thought processes. Whatever you think the next step is for you to get away, he's already shut that down, and he's already planned how he's going to exploit that when you try to do it. He's got the control, he's got the takedown game. Like, I don't even know who a good analog in terms of the sheer depth and variety of his takedown game would be. Like, I mean, who comes close to that? I don't know. I mean, and I think, frankly, his striking struggles were a little bit oversold in this fight. He was partially blocking a lot of those shots that Johnson was throwing at him. Like, wasn't avoiding them completely, but they were glancing off his glove or glancing off his forearm. He wasn't eating a lot of them clean.
He definitely wasn't winning the first 2 minutes. In fact, I think he was losing it pretty badly. Like, it was one-sided.
Yeah, he was losing it, but he wasn't getting, like, I just rewatched the fight on mute, and he did not look that hurt to me. I think if Rogan had not been screaming, we would have been less inclined to think that he was in serious, deep trouble there.
Yeah, but the question is, for Khabib against somebody like Conor, can he go through that same kind of situation? And that's the crazy thing about this matchup. And honestly, I think, well, you know, I think it's pretty clear that McGregor doesn't want this fight. I don't really blame him. It's possibly the one fight at lightweight at which he stands the greatest chance of losing badly. Which isn't to say that he couldn't win in dominant fashion either. But Khabib is a scary opponent, and he presses the one thing that I think McGregor really doesn't want opponents to do, which is to just take him down and control him. I think he probably feels like he can do that in sprinting types of ways, fighting off his back and getting quick sweeps and stuff like that. But I doubt McGregor. I mean, we look at the Mendes fight. He does not like to be held down. You know, that is not his area of preference. And so I don't know if this fight will happen, but you have to say that Khabib has made a much better case for the shot than Tony Ferguson, who somehow did not take advantage of the opportunity to challenge McGregor after beating Dos Anjos. even though he had to have known that Khabib was going to do that, and that's the other guy in the division with a shot. I think he even said he'd be willing to take another fight, which is just bad brand management there. But the thing is, despite that, this fight is crazy because it's one of the only fights I can think of where it stands a really solid chance of being completely dominant either way. I think the most likely outcomes are like 40% McGregor gets an early knockout, 40% Khabib Nurmagomedov totally controls him on the ground, 20% something else, right? It's either one guy has his way completely or the other guy has his way completely.
Yeah, I don't think there's any middle ground there at all. Like there is, but it's a very small percentage chance. Like either Nurmagomedov finds a way to just walk through that range and eats McGregor shots comfortably, or alternatively he gets knocked the fuck out. Like I don't think there's any middle ground there at all.
It's crazy. How often do we see that between two elite fighters where, I mean, it is the purest example I can think of striker versus grappler at the elite level.
Yeah, well, it's just nuts. Like it really is hard to think of a parallel for that. And I think that there are very few guys with whom Khabib would be quite so outclassed on the feet. Like, I think that I think it's a terrible striking matchup for him, because of the open stance matchup, because of the range that McGregor can set. Like it's a terrible matchup for both guys in different ways.
Yeah. Like Conor McGregor,
that's a fascinating thing.
Right. The last person Conor wants to be taken down by is Khabib Nurmagomedov. And the last person Khabib wants to strike with for 2 minutes before his customary first takedown attempt is Conor McGregor.
Yeah. Like I think Edson Barboza on paper is a bad matchup for Khabib in terms of his ability to stuff takedowns and his ability to put volume on you at range, his ability to stick and move. But I still think Khabib wins that fight because when he eventually does get Barboza down, he just murders him. Right. And and the fact that that Barboza works from a much closer distance, like he's got really good tight footwork, but he's not as far away as McGregor is, you know?
Yeah, Khabib kind of has what McGregor has. That's why the fight's so interesting is he has made a reliable tactic out of what for most people is a puncher's chance, or for Khabib, a grappler's chance, right? Where he can be in a bad stylistic matchup, and his ability in that one very specific area of skill is so strong that, and his confidence in it is so strong that he can overcome a lot of matchups that would otherwise be tough for him. I think Michael Johnson on paper was a tough matchup for Khabib, and I think it looked like it for 2 minutes. You know, he was very clearly losing those striking exchanges, and then by the third round of the fight, I think before he took Johnson down, he outstruck him too. Like, Johnson got nothing done after the first round. And that's crazy. That is the kind of stuff that Conor McGregor does to his opponents. They have these edges. They have these on-paper attributes that will help them, and they just don't materialize in the fight, or they're taken away by McGregor's power and his accuracy and his confidence. So that, to me, is a really compelling fight in a unique way. It's not the kind of matchup on paper that we see very often, and it's a huge battle of wills to me, in addition to a battle of very different styles. So I think I would most like to see that.
Also, just before lest we forget this, I want to fight with your chicken is a top 5 all-time line in MMA. Top 5 all time. The man is a golden god.
Let's say top 5 things Khabib Nurmagomedov said during and around UFC 205. I want to fight with your chicken. That's a good one. That's a real good one. Telling Dana between rounds during the fight, I want to fight your son, is great. That is fantastic. Demanding that Michael Johnson give up, telling him you have to give up. I don't want to hurt you, but I have to. That's terrifying. Saying the same thing during the Kimura and threatening Johnson that if he didn't tap, he would break his arm. He didn't want to, but he would. That is also terrifying. What else do we have? What other amazing highlights?
See, I missed those things because I was doing the live blog for the Washington Post. So, like, I was just desperately trying to describe the action. And then write up my summary after the fight. Like, I didn't even notice any of that stuff.
Yeah, he was, and they talked about it afterwards. He was telling Johnson during the fight to give up as he was punching him with the same shot over and over. He's like, you can't escape this. Give up. I don't want to hurt you. He also told, I also think he told Dana between rounds to stop sending him bullshit contracts. He was like, quit sending me fake contracts. Send me a real contract. And Dana apparently said to him, finish the fight and we'll talk. And he did.
That's the greatest fucking thing I've ever heard. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like
legendary status for Khabib.
This card between Khabib, McGregor, and Yoel Romero, whom we will talk about shortly, might be my favorite one in UFC history. Because all three, like, I love McGregor. I don't care what people say about him outside the cage. I love what he does outside the cage. I love what he does inside the cage. He's one of my favorite fighters to watch. I love Khabib. Like, I'm a total mark for his whole thing. I got his T-shirt hanging in my closet. And Yoel Romero, as we're all aware, is my spirit animal. You put all three of those guys on the same card, like that's I mean, it's Orgasm City for me.
Yeah, how can you not be displeased? I won't quite go so far as to say it was Orgasm City, but it was good. It was great.
Agree to disagree, Connor.
So let's try and quickly run through then the two other options. For me, third most important one, I want to see Jose Aldo fight McGregor again. All right, and I'm not even saying that. Part of me is saying that because, as I'm sure listeners of this show will know, as you are a mark for Khabib, so am I a mark for Jose Aldo. He is one of my favorite fighters of all time, and I really want to see him get a real opportunity to beat McGregor for the belt. You know, I think just the humiliation of losing the way he did, it hurt me, man. It really hurt me. I've never seen a result I reacted the way the table sitting next to me during Weidman Silva 2 reacted when Anderson broke his leg. Like, they came, they were wearing yellow and black, they were super big Anderson fans, and it was the most horrible way to see it end. That's how I reacted when Jose Aldo lost to McGregor. I screamed, "Oh no," in the screen. But the other thing that really matters to me is really just because the fight was unsatisfying. I think there's a lot of potential for an entertaining style matchup there. And to me, a 13-second knockout is impressive, but I'll just repeat the metaphor that I created in my my Who's Next for Conor McGregor piece. It was like biting into a ribeye and then realizing that it's just made of cotton candy and it just melts in your mouth. And cotton candy's good, but if you ordered a steak, it's pretty damn unsatisfying. You know, and that's how I feel about that fight. So I really want to actually see a fight between Aldo and McGregor.
Yeah.
I don't think it happens. I really don't. But
and frankly, I don't think there's any way it happens because I don't think there's any way Conor McGregor can make 145 pounds again.
I think
that's
he can.
That's the biggest obstacle. I think he's I bet he's walking around at 182 pounds right now. And there are guys who make the cut down to 145 from that weight, but they don't look healthy. They look like fucking Dustin Poirier. Yeah. And based on the way that McGregor looked at his last two weigh-ins as a featherweight, like, he did not look like the same human being.
It was clearly getting harder and harder for him with time, and I can't imagine it's going to get easier now that he has not fought there for a year.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so I think if Aldo wants to do that fight at 155, or if they could make like 150-pound catch weight, maybe.
If Aldo chases McGregor to lightweight, it'll be my dream. It'll be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Aldo's going to do that though. Like, this is one of those cases where I have loved Jose Aldo's game for years and years and years, but I can't. Like, I find myself so frustrated by him outside the cage, like, especially if what he said, if what was said about him meeting Dana White and backing off his comments about a union, because White said, well, if there's a union, you'll make less money. And Aldo was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not for a union anymore. Like, that to me ruined a lot of the appeal of Jose Aldo outside the cage. Like, I liked that he was outspoken. I liked that he was willing to kind of stick it to the bosses. And if that's not going to be a thing that he's interested in anymore, if he just wants another $100,000 to fight at featherweight, like, you know, okay, like, I'll watch him, I'll be entertained, I will love his game, but I am not compelled by Jose Aldo the way I used to be.
Well, how dare you, sir? But I do think that maybe Aldo, I think he's very proud too, you know. And I think his pride is driven by different things than McGregor. And so I think it would probably hurt him in a way to have to follow McGregor to lightweight to get that fight. I think he sees himself as deserving that matchup. and he will go to his grave thinking that he deserved to fight McGregor until he beat him. So, yeah, I don't think it's particularly likely either. The last one we have to, at the very least, touch on is, of course, McGregor Diaz 3. John Kavanagh came out and said that they prefer that to a fight with Khabib at lightweight. You cannot say that Nate Diaz deserves a shot at the title, but you can make a very strong case that he deserves a third crack at McGregor. As we said before, I still think he is a compelling and difficult opponent for McGregor, even if I would probably flip-flop a second time and pick McGregor over him in their third fight. I think Nate Diaz will always force McGregor to dig deep to beat him. And that's a
uniquely difficult stylistic matchup for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, and that does not mean – people heard us say that last time, and they said, how can you say that? Look, he's 19-10. He has a terrible record or whatever, and, oh, look, he got beaten. How is that a bad stylistic matchup? Because we were saying it after the second fight. A bad stylistic matchup means you can't comfortably beat someone even if you beat them. And I don't think Conor McGregor will ever easily defeat Nate Diaz. I think he will have to work hard every single time. I think he is objectively the better fighter, but I don't think he will ever have an easy fight with Nate Diaz. So that is a compelling reason to see that fight again. I wonder if the UFC won't wait a little longer. Somebody suggested seeing Nate Diaz versus Eddie Alvarez beforehand, and I would love to watch that. While maybe McGregor fights one of the more deserving contenders. Let that fight marinate a bit because we've already seen it twice. But there is a distinct possibility that's the option they go with next, and they go for the, they take the iron while it's still hot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would kind of be surprised if that fight took place at 155 for the lightweight title. I would think that for whatever reason that just isn't going to be a title fight. But I don't think we have any idea of what they're going to do next here. Like, it's really, especially if McGregor is serious about taking some time off to deal with to deal with all of that stuff. Like, I think a lot of things are going to change, but I would actually be surprised if Diaz fought again before a third fight with McGregor. I don't think he has any interest in going out there and fighting somebody for $500,000.
I mean, he said as much. He said he doesn't want to go out there. He's not going to fight until he gets a rematch. So, yeah, it's to me, I think of all of these, the most likely option is Tony Ferguson. I think just because he doesn't have name value and he hasn't asked for it, which is always a bad sign, but I think he is the one that McGregor probably sees as the most beatable guy there. I think he fights actively, and McGregor seemed to imply that was something that was important to him in fight selection when the notion of Khabib was offered, unless that was just an excuse not to fight Khabib.
Well, here's here's another option for you that I don't think we had considered. I would guess if Donald Cerrone beats Matt Brown, which I think he will, and he goes down to 155, I could see them doing Cerrone McGregor.
Maybe there's some heat there. There's some heat there.
Yeah, I think that is actually the second most likely option after a trilogy fight with Diaz.
Yeah, I can see that happening. There's a lot. That's the thing. We don't know. McGregor is a game changer, and he has basically an entire table of delicious options set out before him. So we'll have to wait and see. But we have limited time, and we have several other fights to talk about. So let's take one more break, and when we come back, we're going to talk very briefly, just to say a few words, about the women's strawweight fight between Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. We're going to talk about Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Thompson, more in depth on that one, and then also about Yoel Romero's win over Chris Weidman and his chances against Michael Bisping, and more after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. First up, the only words I really do want to say about Jędrzejczyk Kowalkiewicz, first off, the women's strawweight fight at UFC 205, is that it was not particularly close. It was pretty much exactly the fight that a lot of us predicted, which is that it was a fighter with slight technical and athletic advantages in just about every range and phase in Jędrzejczyk. The only thing, of course, that no one expected is that Jędrzejczyk got hurt by Kovalkiewicz, and it was a one-off shot. She recovered well. There is an argument to be made. I personally scored that round for Kovalkiewicz, but there is a reasonable argument to be made that Kovalkiewicz did not even win the round with that shot because she was still outstruck at basically every other turn. So it was a pretty one-sided fight. And that's what I really want to say about it, because people are now talking about a rematch, and I don't really see the point. I think people are letting their memory of that one really clean, beautiful short right hand cloud their memory of the 4 other rounds, including the one after that in which Jędrzejczyk had her way with Karolina.
In no round, aside from round 4, the one where Kovalkiewicz landed that right hand, did she land more than 8 strikes.
Yeah, that's bad.
Like, it was basically, it didn't, I don't think it looked like this because so many of the shots that Jędrzejczyk landed were leg kicks and body shots. It didn't quite look necessarily as dominant as it was, but she outlanded her more than 3-1 over the course of the fight. And like, I scored the 4th round for Jędrzejczyk because she still outlanded her by 15 shots in that round. Like, it was not close in any way, shape, or form. I can't understand why anybody would want to see a rematch. Like, but you know,
to me, it's the kind of fight that Kovalkiewicz will have to earn. You know, she'd have to beat somebody like Claudia Gadelha or Tisha Torres or something like that like she did with Amanda Nunez, to earn another shot at the champion.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kovalkiewicz is one of those fighters. We were talking about this a little bit off the air. You said that she can look really bad against somebody elite. But she's tough, she's durable, she's a gamer. The downside to being that kind of fighter is, you can go out there and you can outwork Rose Namajunas to win a 29-28 decision. You can also go out there and lose a 29-28 decision to Paige Van Zandt,
Yeah,
like,
that's always been the problem, right? Like, we go from her having a split decision win over Namajunas to just, 2 years before, barely beating Kalindra Faria, having a split decision with somebody who is not really even ranked on the world stage. Not a bad fighter, but still.
That's the problem when you don't have any real finishing ability, when you rely on pace and durability and work rate, is your margin for error is tiny. And if you screw up one time, and it's easily possible to screw up one time in a 15-minute fight, like, you can lose the fight very easily. And so, like, Kovalkiewicz, you can see her grinding out those kinds of decisions, but you can also see her losing like 30-27s to Tisha Torres or like Alexa Grasso, I think probably 30-27s Karolina Kovalkiewicz. So like, and they call it the Miesha Tate corollary, right? That like you have a fighter who isn't especially athletic, but who just doesn't make a ton of mistakes, who's super smart, who's durable, who knows how to exploit when her opponent makes mistakes. Like, sometimes you're going to go out there and you're going to find a rear naked choke in the 5th round to win the bantamweight title. And sometimes you're going to go out there and have a lackluster performance where you drop a 30-27 decision to Raquel Pennington.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Karolina Kovalkiewicz versus Amanda Nunez for the women's bantamweight strap. Let's book it. Make it happen. You know what I would like to see? My final word on this fight for me. I would like to see Kovalkiewicz commit to being a pressure fighter. I think it really plays to her strengths. I think she is physically strong. I think when she has her feet set, she does have pretty good power. We saw that with that right hand. That's the first time we've really seen it with a punch at range, but we have definitely seen it with her knees and elbows in the clinch, and her ground and pound is pretty solid too. When she doesn't feel compelled to keep moving a lot, she can actually crack pretty well, at least more than enough to make her opponents respect her. And she's not very quick on her feet. She's not explosive, and so putting the opponent against the fence, making them retreat, and giving them limited space in which to do so, it really plays to her strengths. Plus, she's insanely durable and very confident in that durability. So I think that would really play to her strengths, and we have seen her do that more and more in recent years. I'd love to see her just go completely whole hog and just be a pressure fighter from now on. And, for me, if I'm the matchmaker, I'm making matches for the champion based on stylistic matchups. That is the thing that would compel me to make a rematch between her and Joanna.
Yeah.
More pressure
Yeah.
fighting, a really focused style of pressure fighting.
Yeah, I'm with that. I think I'm with you there. But before we get dragged into too deep into a fight that was basically 4 10-8 rounds, let's talk a little bit about Stephen Thompson versus Tyron Woodley,
Yeah.
because this did not look anything, I think, like you or I expected it to.
Yeah, can I actually read an email that we got from Philip McKenzie? Philip, I called him Philip because that's what Gmail says. Phil McKenzie from Bloody Elbow. He asked us a question about this. I don't know if you saw this already, Pat.
I did see this, yeah.
He said he was wondering in the cold light of day, did you feel like this fight was a bit of a letdown? We hadn't seen Woodley much, so there was some hope that he might have developed his cagecraft or his left hand. Perhaps too much to expect of him at this stage in his career, and we should just be happy with better timing and some actual ground and pound. Similarly, though, Wonderboy was supposed to be ushering a new era of stand-up and then couldn't beat the oldest mix-up in MMA, by which I take it he means right hand to takedown. He says, should the welterweight title be vacated or given to Nick Diaz or Conor McGregor, rather than these two having a rematch? How much should we blame Robbie Lawler for all this? Really, the point is that the reason I want to read that is because I think Phil raises a very good point, which is that I personally feel a little disappointed by how much trouble Stephen Thompson had with Tyron Woodley's game. And I think the main reason for that is that Tyron Woodley was surprisingly effective at disincentivizing him from doing what he wanted to do.
Yeah, that's over the years, we and many other people have consistently underestimated Tyron Woodley.
Of course.
Have found reasons to discount him or kind of but just about everything that he's done. And frankly, with good reason. Like there have been a lot of performances in his career that have been kind of lackluster for a variety of different reasons. But now, I think what I'm starting to realize is that they have in large part been lackluster by design. That because that's the way that he is a winner. He's a guy who wants to go out there and win fights. He doesn't particularly care what it looks like. If a really slow-paced, grinding, even a god-awful fight to watch is what's going to give him the best chance of winning it, he's perfectly fine with that.
Yeah.
He does not have a switch in his head that's like, I need to entertain people. He is going to go out there and he's going to try and win. And so the best way for him to win this fight against Stephen Thompson was to slow the pace down to a glacial rate, to take away Thompson's ability to dictate range, and to make the most of the opportunities that he got. He did all of those things. And it's not easy to take away Wonderboy's kicking game. We haven't seen anybody take away Wonderboy's kicking game. And he did it with one takedown and period of top control.
Woodley hasn't even been that good of a takedown artist in the UFC. He's been pretty bad considering his wrestling background, in fact. And yet he got a takedown off the bat. And not only did he do the usual top control thing, he really emphasized his striking, particularly because I think he is a smart fighter in the final moments of the round, which made a lot of sense because if Thompson was going to scramble back up when Woodley postured up to strike, don't give him much time to work after he does it. He hurt him in that first round with the right hands. He smashed him in the body with hammer fists from top position and in his sort of a stacked guard, and he cut him open with an elbow. He definitely won the first round, which I didn't expect him to do that. Even when I know he's at his best in the early going, when that surprise factor is there, I did not expect him to beat Stephen Thompson up from top position. And
yeah, well, because we've never seen a violent top position Tyron Woodley before. That is a new development.
Yeah, well, but so that basically told Stephen Thompson two things, because he got that takedown off of a counter to a kick. And that told Stephen Thompson three things, I guess. If I kick, I can be taken down. If I'm taken down, I will probably stay there for the rest of the round. And if I stay there for the rest of the round, I will probably get hurt. So we have three things that Stephen Thompson has to worry about. That's a lot of reasons, very compelling ones, to avoid throwing too many kicks and to avoid really letting your game flourish the way that it can. And I think we have to give Tyron Woodley credit for that.
Yeah, well, so... And there are corollaries to that too, right? Like this extends in multiple ways. So that's one form of disincentivizing him. The other was that he managed to that by doing that, he took away Thompson's volume. Like, we talked in the lead up to this in our preview of this fight about how one of the strengths of Thompson's game is that he wasn't like Lyoto Machida, where he was trying to land one big shot to finish the fight. It's that he had a really sound process. He threw a lot of strikes.
Yeah.
He really piled up volume as time went on. He knew how to win rounds, like, because he is a former kickboxer and because he knows what it takes to win rounds. Woodley completely took that away from him. How many times in this fight did Thompson have Woodley backed up to the fence and he would throw one strike or two strikes and let him off the hook?
Yeah.
Like, he did that because A, he was afraid of the right hand coming back at him, and B, because he was afraid of the takedown.
He pressured Woodley the same way that McDonald pressured him. Like, ineffectively, not with enough volume, too worried about what's coming back. Yeah.
Exactly. It was like, I mean, it was kind of maddening to watch, and it made for a somewhat, aside from the big moments, it made for a somewhat underwhelming fight, but it was Woodley's fight. And, like, I don't know. I mean, I think 47-47, I think, was the right scorecard, but when I rewatched it, man, I thought Woodley probably won the third round. Woodley is convinced he won the third round. And I think that was that Woodley should have outright won the decision.
Well, there you go. So yeah, I will say too, looking at this fight was the first time I think I fully realized that Tyron Woodley backing into the fence is not a thing that Tyron Woodley wants to avoid. Because often in the past, we've talked about his footwork needs to improve. He's too easy to back into the fence. We saw some improvement in that respect against Kelvin Gastelum. I kind of finally realized that he feels comfortable there. That is a place that he thinks plays to his counterpunching game, because the opponent comes closer to him and they get confident and start to throw a little more. They give him the openings that he wants to unleash that surprising right hand. He knows how shocking that right hand can be when he unleashes it, or how shocking the quick takedown can be when he explodes forward. And he lets his opponent control the fight on the surface, while in his head, I think he feels like they are doing what he wants them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, he and that didn't serve him well against Rory McDonald, because Rory McDonald knew how to exploit that. And it's like, oh, well, if you're going to back up to the fence, I'll just tee off on you. But against Wonderboy, if he can get you worried about what he's going to do back to you, it's a perfectly viable strategy. If he can't get you worried, as he couldn't get Rory McDonald worried, it's not viable. But because Wonderboy was so shook from the takedown and frankly from being caught by lead rights that he thought he had prepared for, like, this was something the Naked Gambler, a friend of the show, was talking about on Twitter afterwards, was just the fact that I know for a fact that Wonderboy prepared to deal with Woodley's lead rights. I know. He said, like, he told me that he had somebody throw that punch at him over and over and over again so he could get used to it and figure out how he was going to respond to it. The fact that you feel that prepared for something and you're still getting caught with that shot, I think has to be tremendously demoralizing.
Yeah, and it's indicative of how different it is to fight an athlete like Woodley than it is to fight another fighter, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but so anything else you want to say about this fight, Connor, or should we talk really briefly about Chris Weidman versus Yoel Romero?
That's about it. Let's talk about Romero and Weidman. It was, once again, a fight where the result was surprising. Not what we picked, but the fight kind of looked the way we expected. We knew Romero was capable of a ridiculous amount of violence in a very short time, and we knew that Chris Weidman was the more consistent fighter who would approach the fight with more of a game plan based, more likely route to victory. And both of those things happened. And then Yoel Romero hit Chris Weidman with a knee, which literally he dragged up from hell, from underneath the octagon, and just about split Chris Weidman's head open like a rotten melon. So it was crazy. It was a Yoel Romero fight to the core.
Yeah, that was, I mean, it was as much of a Yoel Romero fight as humanly possible. I mean, yes. I think that we had all predicted that there would be at some point a burst of Yoel Romero violence, but we thought Weidman is durable. Weidman has made real improvements to his game. Weidman is going to be able to deal with that. And you know, we were wrong about that.
Well, it's like Yoel knew that he would get one chance to just land something awful in Chris Weidman, so he picked the one strike that is least likely for somebody to finish the fight after eating it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, he's going to duck into a flying knee. That's the one nobody comes back from.
Yeah. So for those of our listeners who have never dealt with a flying knee I think is the single hardest strike you can throw, because you get all of your body weight behind it because of the way that the angle that it's coming at you from. Like, I remember holding pads for guys throwing flying knees, and I would have like a bruised sternum afterwards.
Sure.
It's like, it is a tremendously violent shot, and if you can catch your opponent ducking down into it the way that Romero did, there's no coming back from that, no matter how durable you are.
That makes it worse.
It doesn't matter.
It shortens the distance the knee has to travel, and with most strikes, you want to maximize the distance it travels to a certain extent. But that's because most strikes you throw with your feet rooted as much as possible. And so
Whereas a flying knee, you're working against gravity, so your velocity is going to be greatest the second after you...
The drive of a cross continues through the course of the punch and only diminishes at the very, very end of its extension. The flying knee is most effective directly off that spring. You have your body weight in the strike in addition to the sweeping motion of the knee. So ducking into it and shortening the arc that knee travels is one of the worst possible things that can happen to you in MMA. Yes, and it certainly looked like that. It was the worst thing I think that's ever happened to Chris Weidman. The worst single moment of his career.
It was one of the most violent knockouts I've ever seen.
It was crazy.
That's like, we've watched a shitload of knockouts over the years in a variety of different combat sports. That was one of the nastiest.
Yeah, so let's talk really briefly then about Romero, who is now apparently challenging for the middleweight title. First of all, I know you're salivating at the prospect of Yoel Romero being the middleweight champion, and there is a chance of that, but I also think that of the four big dogs at middleweight, Weidman, Rockhold, Jacare, Romero's the one most likely to lose to Michael Bisping. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Because Romero is essentially a processless fighter. Yes. And Michael Bisping is the ultimate process fighter. Michael Bisping is going to go out there and try and land enough shots to win the round. And if he lands a real good shot and manages to put you down, that's fantastic. But he is never really going out there trying to finish you. That's not his game. Like, if it comes, fantastic. But his whole approach is predicated on the idea of winning enough rounds to win a decision. That is the exact opposite of Yoel Romero's approach. Romero, I don't think it has ever occurred to him that he can win a round. Like, I don't believe that he approaches fighting in such a way that he thinks.
I truly don't think the thought enters his head of like, oh, did I get a 10-9 that round? I don't think he thinks about it at all.
Yeah, it's like, I think he thinks, oh, I'm going to go out there and do my thing. And, the judges are like this totally separate thing that are not like, where it's like, I don't think he draws the connection between his actions and the way that the judges are scoring the fight.
Well, and then the one time that he's gone to the judges in recent memory, they gave a close fight to him. So there's no reason for him to worry.
That fight was not close. He beat the shit out of Brad Tavares.
No, I'm talking about Jacare.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've completely forgot about that fight. Yeah. So there's no disincentivizing Romero from fighting his kind of fight. He is a burst fighter. He creates offense in short, violent bursts. And I think that suits the fact that he doesn't have great cardio. It suits the fact that he's an unbelievably explosive athlete. I think he's the best athlete who's ever competed in MMA. It suits him perfectly. Now, Bisping, the flip side to this is also true, right? Like, Bisping is a terrible matchup for Romero in the sense that if Romero can't get the finish, he's going to get 50-40 forward. But Bisping is also a fighter who is not hard to hurt, has never been hard to hurt, and is increasingly not that hard to hurt,
That's the big problem for him, is that if, Zane Simon said this on the sixth round after the event, but basically in the Dan Henderson rematch, we saw what can happen to Michael Bisping against someone whose sole focus is to wait for the big shot. And Romero probably won't leap on as many opportunities as Dan Henderson did. In fact, I know he won't. But that it's not a good look coming off of that fight against Yoel Romero. Really, it is hard for me to see Bisping fighting, as with Rockhold, right? First of all, I don't think he's going to knock Romero out. I didn't think he was going to knock out Rockhold, so it could happen. But he would have to get pretty lucky and get that finish, or fight a perfect fight, like exactly the kind of fight he wants, I think, to stand a good chance of avoiding something deadly from Yoel Romero.
But see, this is yes, I agree with that. He does need to fight a perfect fight. But I think Bisping could fight a perfect fight against Yoel Romero and still get his block knocked off.
Yeah, that's who has a better chance of just suddenly ending a fight than Yoel Romero?
Nobody. Absolutely nobody. Maybe in all of MMA. is more capable of finishing the fight in one tiny burst.
Yeah, suddenly winning a fight with nothing prior to that having set the finish up.
Nope.
Who else does that as consistently as him?
Yeah, I mean, now, like the flying knee finish on Weidman, it was set up by the fact that Weidman had done that on several occasions. Like he had used exactly that entry.
Sure.
And so Romero could time, but in general, yes. Like when he finished Lyoto Machida, which I think is still the quintessential Yoel Romero moment.
Yeah.
He had done nothing like that all night.
Yeah.
It just kind of happened.
Well, and he certainly didn't prompt Chris Weidman to take him down. It's not like he thought, oh, he's taking me down off the jab, I'm going to feint him and then come up with a flying knee. He just saw the takedown happening and threw a flying knee.
Yeah, it wasn't like the flying knee that Verdum hit on Mark Hunt, where he very explicitly set that up.
Yes, you can be pretty clear.
Like things that he had done previously in the fight.
You can be pretty sure that Yoel Romero decided to throw that flying knee as he was throwing it. And that is the crazy thing, is that he wins fights with that mentality.
Yeah. I mean, so if we had to make a pick, I think Romero by knockout in the second or third round.
Third round Romero is the way to go, man. He's done that so many times now. You got to go for it.
True. I mean, Romero, he's so dirty, man. Like
he's the worst. He's so frustrating to watch. I imagine myself in his opponent's shoes, and I am like, this motherfucker, get that water off of him. Don't let him complain about like it was Mario Yamasaki was so quick to ignore a legitimate eye poke with Yoel Romero. He would not have done that with any other fighter. And it was because Chris Weidman's team correctly went to him before the fight and said, this guy will try to cheat. So you need to watch him for false complaints. He actually got poked in the eye, and Yamasaki's like, no, come on, Yoel, restart the fight. Which is crazy. It doesn't happen to anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, but he's just so... It's amazing. Like it's truly amazing to me that Romero just is who he is. Like I love him on every level. But so
baffling.
Hopefully we see that fight, because I would very dearly like to see. I want to see the trash talk. Like the little snippet that we got of trash talk was amazing. I especially like the part where Romero was like, "Yeah, no, you tried to call me to come help you with your wrestling." I mean, I like that. Apparently, they have some history, and I would expect Romero to, in his gravelly voice, say some more just incomprehensibly insulting things.
I love you. See you soon, boy. Like the bulk of his trash talk consisted of him telling Michael how much he loved him. It was very strange.
God is love, man. God is love.
God is love.
And so is the point of Yoel Romero's knee.
No forget Jesus. Ambiguous phrasing. Yeah, I think maybe as analysts, the appeal of Yoel Romero is that in a career where we try our best to understand fighting, he's kind of incomprehensible.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's why I love him so much.
He defies all expectation every single fight.
Yeah, because there is no, like, there are commonalities if you look at his fight. If you look at all his fights together, I mean, I think that there are good reasons why he finishes guys in the third round. There are good reasons why he has picked and chosen the strikes that he throws or the things that he does. Like, but they're not comprehensible beforehand. They're only comprehensible in hindsight.
Yeah,
you know, I think that's what makes him so compelling.
Yeah, and they're very, very, only very slightly process driven. You know?
Yeah, like so we both just talked about, you know, Romero by third round knockout. Like that's not because we know why he would not, like it's not like we can construct a good narrative that leads to a third round knockout. It's just like sounds right.
It's just because he keeps doing it. Like that's it. He knocks out. I mean, his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 knockouts have all been in the third round. So why? I'm not 100% sure. So that's Yoel Romero. And that's our show. So, Pat, before we wrap up, what do you have coming out this week? I trust it's a slightly more relaxed week than last week was for you.
Substantially so. So my colleague Jonathan Snowden and I put together a minute-by-minute, angle-by-angle breakdown of McGregor Alvarez. I did the technical analysis, and Jonathan did something a little more literary. I love doing these pieces with Snowden. I think you get a really deep understanding of of how a fight plays out, why it plays out the way it does, and what it means. So please check that out on Bleacher Report. Also, I am doing I'm doing a combined preview of this weekend's 2 cards, just mostly brief picks, but I'll be taking a good deeper look at maybe 4 or 5 fights in total. So that'll be up on Bleacher Report tomorrow on Wednesday or Thursday, probably Thursday because it's really long. And I'm trying to do a new Fall of Rome episode this week. I'm going to try and have that out on Friday or so.
Still a lot of stuff, but compared to last week, Pat, that's a serious downgrade.
Nowhere near as much, man.
No, not even close. For me, I had one article come out already this week called "Who's Next for Conor McGregor and Who Could Beat Him." I basically ran down a lot of the stuff we talked about here, but with a few fighters that we didn't get a chance to mention, guys like Tyron Woodley, Max Holloway, identifying why the fight would be compelling, what weight McGregor would fight them at, and whether or not they could beat him. And surprise, surprise, as we mentioned, a lot of them could, and I can't confidently say that any of them will. So that is the fascinating thing about Conor McGregor. Check that out if you want to hear more about his most likely future candidates for either one of his belts or for just basically all the marbles except the belt. Who knows? And then otherwise, the Ward Kovalev stuff is coming out this week. Videos, and possibly an article too. And I think that's about it. Neither of us are really doing much to cover the next 2 UFC events happening this weekend, but I will have a Sherdog preview coming out this week, breaking that whole card down in brief. So look forward to that, and thank you all for listening. UFC 205, what an amazing show. It was like UFC 200, except basically all the right things happened. Surprises, fun fights, dominant victories, and, everything you ask for in an MMA card. It was truly the card to show your friends who don't know anything about MMA. So I hope some of you got the chance to do that. And otherwise, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you want to get after us, you can do that on social media, most likely on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at BoxingBush, BUSCH, and Pat is at Patrick_Wyman. And thank you all for listening. Once again, now I'm rambling, so let's wrap it up. If you came here today for the final points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.